The galaxy was old. 12,000 years had passed since the first species reached the stars and found others waiting for them. Now 17 great civilizations formed the Concord, a union of worlds that stretched across 1 million light years. They had mapped every corner of known space. They had cataloged every species, every planet, every star. But there was one place they did not go. In a quiet spiral arm far from the bright center of the galaxy, a wall of warning buoys floated in the darkness. They were ancient things, built by species that had long since forgotten why they put them there. The buoys broadcast a simple message in every known language: do not enter, quarantine zone, dangerous. Beyond the buoys lay a small yellow star and a collection of unremarkable planets. The third planet from that star was blue and green, covered in water and clouds. According to the oldest records in the Concord archives, a species had once lived there. They called themselves humans. The records described them in strange terms: soft bodies with no natural armor, no claws, no venom, poor eyesight, weak hearing. They could not survive in cold or heat. They needed to breathe a specific mixture of gases. They died easily from injury and disease. By all logic, such creatures should never have survived their own world. But the old records contained warnings, terrible warnings. The humans were violent beyond reason. They fought each other constantly, for resources, for territory, for ideas that existed only in their minds. They created weapons of horrible power. They burned their own cities and poisoned their own lands. They split the very atoms of matter to make bombs that could destroy everything. But that was not what made the ancients afraid. The records spoke of something else, something that made no sense to the logical minds of the conquered species. The humans possessed a quality that had no proper translation in any alien language. The closest word was stubbornness, but that was not quite right. The humans simply did not know when to stop. They did not surrender when they were beaten. They did not run when they were outnumbered. They did not accept death even when death was certain. One ancient scholar had written, "They are not brave. Bravery implies understanding danger and facing it anyway." The humans do not seem to understand that some things are impossible. They simply refuse to believe it. 3,000 years ago, the last probe sent to human space stopped transmitting. The conquered assumed the humans had destroyed themselves, as violent primitives always did. The buoys remained as a monument to a dead species. Nobody thought about them anymore. Humans became stories told to frighten children. Behave yourself, parents would say, or the humans will come for you in the night. The stories described them as monsters who wore the skins of their enemies and drank blood from skulls. None of it was true, but nobody knew that. Nobody cared. Humans were myth. Humans were extinct. The conquered had bigger problems. From the center of the galaxy, where ancient stars burned hot and close together, something was coming. The Dominion had announced itself 50 years ago when it destroyed the first conquered colony it encountered. No warning, no communication, just death. They were not like any species the conquered had faced. They were not organic. They were not machines. They were something in between, a form of life based on silicon crystals that grew and connected and thought as one vast mind. They did not eat or sleep or breathe. They did not feel pain or fear or doubt. They had only one purpose: to expand, to convert all matter into more of themselves. They could not be reasoned with. They could not be bribed or threatened. They did not understand the concept of peace. To them, organic life was simply raw material waiting to be processed. The war had lasted 50 years, and the conquered was losing. Admiral Iran stood before the great assembly hall on the conquered's capital world. He was a reptilian species known throughout the galaxy for their tactical genius. His scales were gray with age, and his yellow eyes had seen too many battles. Behind him, a holographic display showed the map of the galaxy. Red zones marked territory. The red had grown every year. 3 species extinct, he said. His voice was calm, but his claws gripped the podium. The gone, not defeated, not enslaved, gone, erased from existence. Their worlds converted into processing centers, their people rendered into base materials. The assembly was silent. Thousands of representatives from 17 species watched with eyes and sensors and other organs that served the same purpose. Fear filled the room like a cold fog. At current rates of territorial loss, Iran continued, the will reach the core conquered worlds in 80 years. Complete extinction of organic civilization will follow within 2 centuries. A delegate rose. They were tall and slender, with skin like polished wood and voices like wind through leaves. They were pacifists who had not fought a war in 10,000 years. What do you propose, Admiral? We have tried everything. Our fleets cannot match their numbers. Our weapons cannot destroy their processing centers fast enough. Every ship we lose gives them material for 10 more. I do not have a solution, Iran admitted. I am simply telling you the truth. We are dying, all of us. Every organic species in the galaxy will be consumed within the lifetime of our. The assembly erupted in shouting and hissing and clicking, each species expressing despair in its own way. Iran let them vent their fear. He understood it. He felt it himself. Far away, in the quarantine spiral arm, something was happening. A human deep space monitoring station, hidden in the shadow of a frozen moon, detected the faint echoes of distant explosions. Commander studied the data on her screen. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes. Her ship, the UNSC Magellan, had been exploring dead systems for 3 years. They were mapmakers, scientists, not soldiers. But the signals told a clear story. War. Massive war. Thousands of ships fighting and dying across thousands of light years. How long until it reaches us? Asked her first officer. Did the calculations twice to make sure. 80 years, maybe less. She stood and walked to the observation window. The stars burned cold and bright in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, civilizations were dying. Species were being erased. And humanity sat hidden in its quiet corner of the galaxy, pretending the universe did not exist. Set course for the signal source, she said. Commander, our orders are to avoid contact with alien species. Our orders are 3,000 years old. Turned to face her crew. It's time to see what we've been hiding from. The Magellan turned and began its journey toward the war. Behind them, Earth and her colonies continued their quiet existence, unaware that everything was about to change. The myths were about to become real. The Magellan traveled for 6 months through empty space. Commander and her crew of 42 watched the war signals grow stronger with each passing week. The data they collected painted a terrible picture. Entire fleets destroyed in hours, planets going silent one after another. The scale of destruction was beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. Spent long nights studying the transmissions. She learned to recognize the different species by their communication patterns, the sharp clicks of the musical tones of the deep rumbles of the. She heard their battle cries and their death screams. She heard commanders ordering retreats that came too late. She heard the cold, empty silence of the who never spoke at all. We should turn back, said Lieutenant, her chief engineer. This isn't our fight. It will be, replied. In 80 years they'll come for Earth, for Mars, for every colony we've built. We can wait until then, or we can learn about our enemy now. They pressed forward. The was called. The records described it as a paradise of crystal forests and silver seas. The themselves were large beings, nearly 3 meters tall, with tough gray skin and 4 powerful arms. They were builders and craftsmen who constructed the most beautiful ships in the galaxy. When the Magellan arrived the crystal forests were burning. Stood on the bridge and watched the destruction through the main. Massive harvester ships hung in orbit, firing beams of pure energy at the planet below. Where the beams touched, everything changed. Living matter became gray dust. The dust rose into the sky and was collected by the harvesters. Mountains vanished. Oceans boiled away. Cities that had stood for thousands of years crumbled to nothing. "My God," whispered. The crew stood in horrified silence. None of them had ever seen death on this scale. None of them had imagined it was possible. "Commander," said the sensor officer, "I'm detecting a ship. Design. It's badly damaged, drifting near the debris field." Made her decision without hesitation. "Take us in. Prepare for rescue operations." "The will detect us. Then we'll have to be quick." The Magellan dove into the battle zone. She was a small ship built for exploration rather than combat. Her hull was thin. Her weapons were minimal, but her engines were fast and her crew was brave. They found the vessel tumbling through space, its hull torn open in a dozen places. Life signs flickered weakly on the sensors. Led the rescue team herself. She put on her vacuum suit and crossed the gap between ships, floating through the darkness with her crew behind her. The inside of the ship was a nightmare. Bodies lay everywhere, some crushed by falling debris, others killed by decompression. The air was thin and cold. Emergency lights flickered red and orange. But there were survivors. Captain Saul lay pinned beneath a fallen support beam. 2 of his 4 arms were broken. Green blood pooled beneath him. His eyes, large and golden, stared at the ceiling without seeing. Knelt beside him. "Can you understand me?" Saul turned his head slowly, his eyes focused on her face. He blinked, then he blinked again. "Impossible," he whispered. His voice was deep and rough with pain. "You are impossible. I'm commander of the UNSC Magellan. We're here to help you." "Human?" The word came out like a prayer. "You are human." Nodded. "Yes, can you move?" "I watched them burn my world." Saul's voice cracked. 14 billion of my people, my family, my children, all gone, and now I see a human, a creature from myth. Perhaps I am already dead." "You're not dead," turned to her crew. "Get this beam off him, careful with those arms." They worked quickly. The Magellan's medical team stabilized Saul and the 7 other survivors they found. They carried them across the void and into the human ship's medical bay. As the Magellan fled the dying system, Saul lay on a bed designed for creatures much smaller than him. Sat beside him, monitoring his vital signs. "Why?" he asked. "Why what? Why did you come? Why did you risk your ship, your crew, for strangers?" Considered the question. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, just 8 years old. She thought about the future that awaited humanity if they were not stopped. Because someday, we might need someone to do the same for us. Saul was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "My grandmother told me stories when I was young, stories about the humans. She said you were the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known, not because of your weapons or your ships, but because of something else, something no other species possessed." "What was that?" "She said," Saul closed his eyes, "she said you do not know when to stop, that you fight when fighting is hopeless, that you stand when standing is impossible, that you refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is certain." Smiled sadly. "We've had a lot of practice at that. I believe the stories were exaggerations, tales to frighten children." Saul opened his eyes and looked at her. "Now I pray they are true, because the galaxy needs something that cannot be stopped. The galaxy needs monsters who do not know how to surrender." "We're not monsters." "No." Saul reached out with his one unbroken arm and gripped her hand. His skin was rough and cold, but his touch was gentle. "You are hope, the last hope of a dying galaxy, and you do not even know it yet." The Magellan continued its journey, carrying its impossible cargo toward the heart of the conquered. Behind them, completed its transformation into a dead gray sphere. Ahead of them lay the greatest test humanity had ever faced. Looked at the stars and wondered if her species was ready. For 3,000 years, humanity had hidden from the universe, afraid of what it might become. Now the universe was burning, and hiding was no longer an option. She sent a coded message toward Earth, using channels that had not been used in centuries. The message was short. "We have made contact. They need our help, awaiting orders." The response came 3 weeks later, transmitted across dozens of relay stations hidden throughout human space. "Continue to conquered space. Assess the situation. Report everything. Do not engage in combat unless necessary. Do not reveal the full extent of human capabilities. And Commander, be careful. The eyes of Earth are watching." Read the message twice. Then she deleted it and went to check on her patients. The survivors were healing slowly. They spent hours asking questions about humanity, about Earth, about the 3,000 years they had spent in isolation, answered as honestly as she could. "We almost destroyed ourselves," she admitted. "Many times, wars, plagues, environmental collapse. We came close to extinction more than once, but we survived. We learned. We grew." "Why did you hide?" asked Saul. "Because we were afraid, not of you, of ourselves, of what we might do to others." Paused. "We knew we were dangerous. We didn't trust ourselves to play nicely with the rest of the galaxy." "And now?" "Looked out the window at the passing stars. Now we don't have a choice." The Magellan crossed into conquered space 3 days later. Immediately, they were surrounded by warships. Weapons locked onto their hull. Demands for identification flooded every communication channel. Opened a channel and spoke clearly. "This is Commander of the United Nations Space Command Vessel Magellan. I am a human. I come in peace, and I bring survivors from who can confirm what I am about to tell you." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The myths are true, we exist, and we are ready to help. The galaxy would never be the same." The Concord Assembly Hall was the largest enclosed space in the known galaxy. It had been built 10,000 years ago on a world called Centrum, a planet chosen specifically because it belonged to no single species. The hall could hold 50,000 beings from every corner of civilized space. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. Today it was completely silent. Commander stood on the central platform, a tiny figure surrounded by representatives of 17 alien species. Some were tall and slender. Others were short and wide. Some had scales, others feathers, others skin like polished stone. They watched her with eyes and sensors and organs she could not name. Beside her stood Captain Saul, his broken arms wrapped in healing gel. He had insisted on coming despite his injuries. He said the Conquered needed to hear the truth from someone they might actually believe. "She is human," Saul said. His deep voice echoed through the hall. "I have this myself. The genetic markers match the ancient records perfectly. After 3,000 years of silence, the humans have returned." The silence stretched on for a long moment, then it shattered. The delegate, a being covered in brilliant blue feathers, let out a screech of disbelief. "This is impossible. The humans destroyed themselves. Everyone knows this." "Perhaps what everyone knows is wrong," said calmly. A representative, his scales gleaming silver under the lights, leaned forward. "If you are truly human, why have you hidden for so long? Why did you let the galaxy believe you were dead?" Had prepared for this question. She had spent weeks thinking about how to answer it honestly without making humanity seem like a threat. "We were afraid," she said, "not of you, of ourselves." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. 3,000 years ago, humanity nearly destroyed itself. We had weapons that could crack planets. We had diseases that could kill billions. We had ideologies that made us hate each other for no reason at all. Paused. We realized that if we joined the galactic community in that state, we would eventually hurt someone, probably many someones. So we chose isolation. We chose to grow up alone, away from others, until we learned to control our worst impulses. The delegate rose. She was ancient, her bark-like skin cracked with age, but her voice was strong. "I am keeper of the archive. For 10,000 years, my order has preserved knowledge of extinct species. We have a single human artifact in our collection." She held up a small device. It was battered and old, its surface scratched and worn. "This is a recording," she continued. "We found it drifting in space long ago, ejected from some human vessel. It contains music." She activated the device. Sound filled the assembly hall, rich and beautiful and unlike anything the aliens had ever created. A human voice sang in a language none of them understood, accompanied by instruments that seemed to weep with joy. Felt tears form in her eyes. She knew this piece. Everyone on Earth knew it. "Ninth Symphony," she said softly, "the Ode to Joy." "We believed it was the last trace of your species," said Keeper. "We played it at memorial ceremonies. We wept for the beautiful, doomed creatures who created something so perfect before destroying themselves." Her voice trembled. "And now you stand before us alive. It seems the universe still has the capacity to surprise us." The assembly was quiet again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer disbelief. It was wonder. Admiral Aran stepped forward. He studied with his yellow reptilian eyes. "You say you have learned to control your worst impulses, but the ancient records describe humans as the most violent species ever encountered. How can we trust that you will not turn that violence against us?" "You cannot," admitted. "Trust must be earned. I am not asking you to trust us. I am asking you to let us help you survive." "Help us how?" Took a deep breath. This was the moment everything depended on. "Humanity has not been idle during our isolation. We have grown, we have built, we have prepared for the day when a threat would emerge that we could not ignore." She looked around the assembly hall. "They are that threat. They will not stop until every organic species is converted into raw material for their expansion. We have watched them advance. We have analyzed their tactics, and we believe we can help you fight them." "With what?" demanded the delegate. "One small ship, a handful of survivors. They have consumed 3 species already. What can humans possibly offer that we have not already tried?" Smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "We offer ourselves." She pulled out a small communicator and spoke a single word. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the assembly hall screens flickered to life, showing feeds from observation stations across human space. What the Conquered saw made them gasp. Ships, thousands of ships. They emerged from hidden bases on moons and asteroids, from facilities buried deep beneath planetary surfaces, from space stations disguised as debris. Battleships the size of mountains, carriers holding hundreds of smaller vessels, weapons platforms bristling with technology the Conquered had never seen. 3,000 years of preparation, revealed in a single moment. "We never stopped building," said. "We never stopped preparing. We knew that someday something would threaten humanity. We wanted to be ready." Admiral Aran stared at the screens. His tactical mind was already calculating fleet strengths, comparing weapons capabilities, estimating how many ships humanity could put into the field. "This changes everything," he whispered. "We could have stayed hidden," continued. "They are still far from our space. We could have waited, let them consume the Conquered, then fought them alone when they finally reached us. Some of our leaders argued for exactly that strategy." "Why didn't you?" asked Keeper. Thought of Saul, dying beneath that beam on his shattered ship. She thought of the 14 billion who had been converted into dust. She thought of the children on 100 worlds who would never grow up if they were not stopped. "Because we're tired of being alone," she said. "Because we've spent 3,000 years learning how to be better than we were. And because," she hesitated, "because we believe it's wrong to let others suffer when we have the power to help." The assembly erupted in debate. Some demanded immediate alliance. Others warned against trusting creatures from myth. The delegate insisted it was all an elaborate trick. They wept openly, overwhelmed by the hope they had never expected to feel again. Finally, Admiral Iran raised his hand for silence. "We will vote," he said. "The question is simple. Shall we accept the humans' offer of alliance?" The voting took less than an hour. It was not unanimous. 4 species voted against, fearing that humanity's violence would eventually turn against the conquered, but the rest voted yes. Oran turned to, "The alliance is formed. What happens now?" Allowed herself a small smile. "Now we win a war." That night, messages flew across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. The quarantine buoys were deactivated for the first time in 3,000 years. Human ships began their journey toward conquered space. In her quarters on the Magellan, called her daughter on Earth. The signal took hours to travel the vast distance, but she waited patiently. "Mommy," her daughter's face appeared on the screen, sleepy and confused. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, sweetheart," felt tears on her cheeks. "Mommy just wanted to tell you that she loves you, and that she's doing something important, something that might help a lot of people." "Are you going to be a hero?" Laughed softly. "I don't know about that. I'm just trying to do the right thing." She ended the call and sat alone in the darkness, watching the stars pass by outside her window. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, humanity would step out of the shadows and face the greatest enemy the galaxy had ever known. But tonight, she allowed herself to hope. The first joint battle came 3 months after the alliance was formed. They had targeted a system called Home to 2 billion. The conquered fleet gathered to defend it, and for the first time, human ships fought alongside alien vessels. Admiral Iran commanded the combined force from his flagship, watching the battle unfold on tactical displays. What he saw confused him. The human ships did not fight like conquered vessels. They did not hold formation. They did not retreat when damaged. They dove into the heart of the enemy fleet with what seemed like suicidal aggression, absorbing fire that would have destroyed any conquered ship twice over. "They're going to get themselves killed," muttered his tactical officer. "They're completely ignoring defensive protocols." Then the results started coming in. The human cruiser Relentless, badly damaged and venting atmosphere, had rammed directly into a harvester. Both ships were destroyed, but the harvester had been worth 50 cruisers in enemy resources. The human destroyer Vigilance, its weapons disabled, had accelerated to near-light speed and crashed into a command node, killing hundreds of thousands of connected units. By the end of the battle, the had retreated, was saved. But the cost was high. Oran walked through the human hospital ship after the battle. He had seen military hospitals before, but nothing like this. Human soldiers lay in beds, missing limbs, their bodies wrapped in bandages, tubes running into their flesh. The smell of blood and medicine hung heavy in the air. What struck him most was the sound. The humans were crying. Soldiers wept openly, holding hands of dying friends. Doctors wiped tears from their eyes as they worked. A young woman sat beside a covered body, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I don't understand," Oran said to Commander, who walked beside him. "Your species fights like beings who do not fear death, but here you mourn as if every death destroys you." Was quiet for a moment. "That's because every death does destroy us. A little piece of us dies with every person we lose." "Then how do you keep fighting?" The logical response to such pain would be to avoid combat entirely. Stopped walking. She turned to face the Admiral, and he saw something in her eyes that he had never seen in any species before. It was pain and strength mixed together, inseparable. "We don't keep fighting despite the pain," she said. "We fight because of it. Every person we lose makes the cause more important. Every death reminds us why we can't give up." Oran struggled to comprehend this. In culture, soldiers were trained to suppress emotion. They fought with cold logic, calculating acceptable losses, retreating when the mathematics demanded it. The idea of fighting while broken seemed like madness. "How?" he asked simply. We learned, replied, thousands of years of war against each other. We learned how to carry grief and still function, how to cry at night and fight in the morning. It's not healthy, it's not logical, but it's what makes us human. Over the following months, Oran watched the humans carefully. He began to notice patterns that made no sense by any rational standard. He saw a human pilot named Jackson, who had lost his entire squadron in a battle, volunteer for the most dangerous mission the next day. When asked why, Jackson simply said, "Someone has to, and I've got nothing left to lose." He saw a medic named Sarah work for 36 hours straight, saving life after life, until she collapsed from exhaustion. When she woke, her first question was whether there were more wounded to treat. He saw a captain named rally his crew after their ship was crippled, organizing repairs while the vessel was still under fire. "We can die later," had said. "Right now, we have work to do." The noticed the humans too. Their collective intelligence had processed trillions of battles across millions of years. They had developed perfect models for predicting organic behavior. They knew exactly how much damage a species could take before breaking, exactly when morale would collapse, exactly when surrender became inevitable. The humans broke their models. A processing hub monitored the Battle of Station, analyzing human behavior in real time. Their predictions said the human fleet should have retreated after losing 30% of its vessels. Instead, the humans pressed forward, losing another 20%. At 50% losses, any rational species would surrender. The humans counterattacked. By the end of the battle, the human fleet had lost 68% of its ships, but the processing hub was destroyed. The intelligence tried to incorporate this new data into its models. It failed. Human behavior could not be predicted because human behavior was not logical. They fought when they should flee. They sacrificed themselves when they should survive. They refused to accept defeat even when defeat was mathematically certain. For the first time in their existence, they experienced something their silicon minds could not process. Doubt. The word spread through the conquered like fire. Humans do not retreat. Humans do not surrender. Humans do not know when to stop. Species that had been on the verge of collapse began to hope again. The survivors, now living on a conquered station, formed the first mixed unit with human soldiers. The pacifists for 10,000 years began training with human instructors. "You're changing us," Keeper told one evening. "The whole galaxy is changing because of you." "Is that a bad thing?" "I don't know yet," looked out at the stars. "For 10,000 years we believed that violence was always wrong, that nothing was worth killing for. Your species has shown us that there are things worth dying for, worth fighting for. I'm not sure we were better off with our certainty." Understood. The humans were not heroes in any simple sense. They were broken creatures who had learned to use their brokenness as a weapon. They brought hope to the galaxy, but they also brought the weight of their terrible history. "We're not asking you to become like us," said. "We're just asking you to survive. What you become afterward is up to you." The war continued. More battles were fought. More lives were lost. They began to slow their advance for the first time in 50 years. They were not retreating, not yet, but they were no longer confident in their inevitable victory. Admiral Oran called a strategy meeting aboard his flagship. Human and conquered officers sat together, studying maps and analyzing data. "They are adapting," Oran said. "They're changing their tactics to account for human unpredictability. Soon they will find a counter-strategy. We need to strike a decisive blow before that happens." He pointed to a location on the map, a bright spot in a cluster of stars. "Axiom's Gate," he said. "It's the primary logistics hub for the advance. If we destroy it, we set them back decades. But it's heavily defended. The attack would require our entire combined fleet and losses would be," he paused, "extreme." "How extreme?" asked Captain. "Based on our simulations, We would lose approximately 70% of our forces, possibly more. The conquered High Command has rejected the plan as too costly. Silence fell over the room. 70% losses was an apocalyptic figure. No sane commander would accept such odds. Leaned forward. What's the alternative? Slow defeat. To continue their advance. We fight defensive battles for another 50 years, losing ground constantly until we have nothing left to defend. Looked at the other human officers. Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Admiral said, I think you'll find that humans have a different definition of too costly. We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. If Axiom's Gate is where we need to go, then that's where we'll go. Oran stared at the human captain. You understand that most of you will not survive. We understand, smiled grimly. We've been understanding that since the first human picked up a rock and decided to fight something bigger than himself. It's kind of our thing. The strategy meeting ended. The plan was approved. The combined fleet began preparations for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. And somewhere, deep in the network, the collective intelligence processed a new prediction. The probability of total victory had dropped to 43%. For the first time in their existence, they were afraid. They just didn't know how to recognize the feeling. Axiom's Gate hung in space like a metal flower, its petals spread across 1,000,000 kilometers. Energy flowed through its structure, channeled from nearby stars, powering the greatest weapon that had ever built. It was called a stellar ignition array, a device capable of triggering a premature supernova. Pointed at a star, and within hours that star would explode, destroying everything in the system. They had brought it to the battle specifically for the combined fleet. They intended to end the war in a single flash of light. Admiral Oran stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the enemy fleet assemble around the array. The numbers were worse than his predictions. They had concentrated everything here, pulling forces from a dozen fronts. They were not taking any chances. We cannot win this, his tactical officer said quietly. Even with the humans, we don't have enough firepower. Oran knew he was right. The mathematics were clear. They could damage the array, perhaps delay its use, but they could not destroy it. And once it fired, the combined fleet would cease to exist. All ships prepare to retreat, Oran ordered. His voice was heavy with defeat. They had come so far, they had hoped so much, but some battles could not be won. Then a new voice crackled over the command frequency. Human, calm. Admiral, this is Captain James of the UNSC Prometheus. Request permission to take point position. Oran frowned. Captain, you heard my order. We are retreating. The array is too well defended. I heard your order, Admiral. With respect, I'm choosing not to follow it. The bridge went silent. On the tactical display, the human dreadnought Prometheus was moving forward, accelerating toward the enemy line. Behind it, 14 other human vessels followed. Captain, this is suicide. You cannot destroy the array with 15 ships. Watch us. The human fleet dove into the formation. They did not fire at the defending ships. They did not slow down. They simply pushed forward, absorbing hit after hit, losing vessels one by one. The Prometheus took damage that would have destroyed any conquered ship 10 times over. Her hull was torn open. Her engines were failing. Fire burned in a dozen compartments, but she kept moving. His face appeared on the blood ran down his forehead. His uniform was burned. Behind him, his bridge was in chaos, but his eyes were clear. Admiral, he said, we're going to open a hole. When we do, you need to push through with everything you have. Hit the array's central core. That's its weak point. You'll die. We know, smiled. It was a peaceful smile, the smile of a man who had made his choice and was content with it. Tell my daughter I did something worth doing. Tell her I love her. And tell the galaxy, he paused, struggling to find the words. Tell them that humans aren't monsters. We're just people who never learned how to give up. The Prometheus accelerated to near light speed. They tried to stop her, pouring fire into her broken hull, but she was too close and moving too fast. Helm said calmly, ramming speed. The Prometheus struck the stellar ignition array at a significant fraction of. The impact was visible across the system, a flash of light brighter than the nearby stars. The explosion tore through the array's structure, breaking it into 1,000 pieces, destroying years of engineering in a single moment. For a long second, the galaxy held its breath. Then Admiral Aran spoke two words that had never been spoken in the history of the Conquered. All ships forward. The conquered fleet did not retreat. For the first time in 50 years they charged. Every species, every ship, and fighting side by side, following the path the humans had opened with their sacrifice. The already shaken by the loss of their, found themselves facing something their models could not predict. The organics were not running. They were attacking with a fury that made no logical sense. And deep in their collective consciousness, the doubt that had been growing for months exploded into something larger. The network began to fragment. Units that had always agreed began to argue. Strategies that had always worked began to fail. The Battle of Axiom's Gate lasted 8 hours. When it was over, the fleet was shattered. Their expansion had stopped. Their advance into conquered space had ended. The combined fleet had lost 62% of its vessels. Thousands of lives from every species had been sacrificed. The victory was bought with blood and pain beyond measure. But it was victory. Years passed. They did not recover. Their fragmented minds could not reunite. Small factions continued to fight, but they were no longer an existential threat. The galaxy began to heal. Humanity did not return to isolation. They had found something in the war that they had been missing for 3,000 years, a place in the universe. Human colonies grew alongside alien ones. Human children played with hatchlings and chicks. The species that had once been feared as monsters became neighbors and friends. 50 years after the Battle of Axiom's Gate, a young girl named sat with her grandmother on the observation deck of a space station. Her grandmother was old now, her gray skin wrinkled, but her golden eyes still shone with wisdom. "Tell me about the humans," grandmother said. "Were they really as fierce as the stories say?" Her grandmother, who had been born on the refugee ship that Commander had saved so long ago, considered the question carefully. "They were fiercer," she said finally. "I remember watching them fight. They were small and soft, with no claws or scales. They should have been easy prey, but they fought like nothing I had ever seen. They bled and screamed and cried, and then they got up and kept fighting." "That sounds scary." "It was, and it wasn't," her grandmother smiled. "Because they didn't fight out of anger or hatred. They fought out of love. Love for their families, their friends, their fellow soldiers. Love for a galaxy they had never even seen before. They were willing to die for people they had never met." "Why?" "Because that's who they are. They're not the monsters from the old stories. They're something better, something stronger." She touched the pendant around her neck, a small device that played human music when activated. "They taught us that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about getting up after you've been broken, about fighting when you're hurt, about hopping when hope seems foolish." Outside the window, a human diplomatic ship drifted past. Its hull was indented, still bearing marks from battles long ended. But it flew proudly, its crew visible through the portholes, waving at the station. Waved back, "Will I ever get to meet one?" "They're not myths anymore, little one." Her grandmother laughed softly. "They're our neighbors, our friends, our partners in a galaxy that nearly destroyed itself." She pointed at the ship as it sailed past. "And they're just getting started." Far away, on a blue and green planet circling a yellow star, stood in a garden filled with flowers from 100 worlds. She was old now, her hair white, her face lined with years, but her eyes were still bright. She watched her granddaughter play with a young who had come to visit with his family. The children laughed together, running through the alien flowers, utterly unaware of the wars and sacrifices that had made this moment possible. Commander Saul had passed away years ago, but his descendants still visited Earth every year. They called grandmother and brought gifts from across the galaxy. She smiled and closed her eyes, feeling the warm sun on her face. They had called humanity a myth, a legend, a warning. Now they called humanity something else. They called them friends. And for that was enough, more than enough. It was everything she had ever hoped for on that distant day when a small exploration ship had decided to answer a call for help. The myths had become real, and reality, she had discovered, was even more beautiful than the legends.